The president was conveying this to you at the White House.
In the Oval Office.
And he told you that he'd had a personal conversation with President Putin about hookers?
Yes.
It's not okay for the president of the United States to say a private citizen should be in jail. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. They both can't be right that I'm in the other team's pocket. The challenge of being the FBI in today's political environment is you're not on anybody's side. That confuses people, which I get, and it angers people, which I also get.
Hello and welcome to Trumpcast, the show about the man who heard from Vladimir Putin that Russia has the most beautiful prostitutes, Donald Trump. I'm Jacob Weisberg, and I'm here with Virginia Heffernan, and we're here with 2 copies of James Comey's new book, A Higher Loyalty. And we have done something that very few people talking about the book have done. We've read it, Virginia.
We've read it.
We've read it cover to cover. I've read every page of this book.
I have read every page except the excerpts about Trump that I had already read. I did want to see in what context he drops the stories, the well-known stories that he gave in the testimony and that we've now seen in the memos.
Before we get into it, I have a lot to ask you about this book, but we have to talk briefly about our live show coming up on May 30th at the Bell House in Brooklyn. I'm so excited about this show because we haven't done a real live show in New York. It's going to be really fun. We are going to have the people who've been doing the improv on our show. Steve Waltine, Kate James, and Asher Perlman are going to be doing some of their sketch comedy for us.
And it's improv, some of it, right? Like, they come up with their sketches. They're barely scripted. They often come into the studio.
They're not scripted. They come in the studio and they record like 4 of them in 45 minutes. It's unbelievable. I want people to see how they do this. It's so great.
I think that's going to be the best part. For tickets to that, go to slate.com/live. That's slate.com/live.
Yes. And if you have any suggestions for the show, let us know. You can tweet at us at Real Trumpcast. So this book, Virginia, I really liked it. And I didn't expect to like it, but before we get into our opinions, I just want to ask you about what you thought about Comey before you read the book and how it changed your view of him at all. Did it change your view of Comey?
It did. I knew. It's funny because the word about him that was, I think, almost always leveraged was sanctimonious, or he was sometimes called self-righteous, and that got in his way. It was a kind of moral hubris that led him to make a bad decision. The question of whether he was ill-intentioned or not, I didn't know. But as for sanctimony, I think one of the first things he tells us is that he's prone to sanctimony. I get the feeling that he's always telling people that he's prone to sanctimony and correcting for it. There's a level of neurosis in him that not sanctimony, but just almost like a Hamlet-like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? How am I coming across? Have I consulted my principles? What does this person think of me? How's he acting? Is he trying to pressure me? He contrasts himself to Robert Mueller in the book and clearly considers himself, he has the flaw almost of overthinking. He even says that some bad leaders get analysis paralysis, and he seems to have done that at times.
This is fascinating. I think you've gotten right to the heart of what is really interesting to me about James Comey as a person and the way he portrays himself. He says right at the beginning, you're right in the author's note at the beginning about how he can be prideful and overconfident and driven by ego. And then he says, I underline this passage much further along in the book, where he says, the stuff that gets to me most is the claim that I am in love with my own righteousness, my own virtue. And he said, I've long worried about my ego. I'm proud of the fact that I try to do the right thing. I'm proud of the fact that I try to be truthful and transparent. So he's both denying and admitting that at the same time, this righteous quality. He's sort of saying, I hate that people accuse me of this. And the reason he hates it is there's kind of something to it. But what is that line? It's not necessarily contradictory to think about doing the right thing and also think about your reputation for doing the right thing.
Yes.
I think Comey pretty clearly, if you read this book, I think he sort of lays it on the table in what was to me a very compelling way. I don't think there's another secret James Comey who has evil motives and, is thinking about his career. He's clearly a guy who goes through life thinking about the right thing to do, but also with being seen as a guy who does the right thing and is morally reflective. And it is I don't know that it paralyzes him, but there's a quality people like which is the quality of being ethical and doing the right thing and thinking about doing the right thing. And there's a quality people don't like, which is the Reverend Comey thing and the idea that he's
the meddlesome priest.
You're holier than thou, or you're righteous, or you think you're better than other people. Clearly rubs Trump and the Trump people the wrong way. I mean, that gets under their skin about Comey, that he thinks he's in the right.
I think also, I was part of this, as you know, slow burn live event last night, and I think Bob Woodward at it. I'm name dropping, but I'll just go ahead. The next name I'm going to drop is Archibald Cox,
who was not on the panel with you.
Bob Woodward said that, was talking about how Nixon disliked that Archibald Cox, was a Harvard person. And there's something in James Comey seems like he might strike Trump as someone who thinks he's better than other people. And Comey, this is a higher loyalty. There's something elevated, physically elevated, and, even an idealistic about Comey. He likes the idea that he's uncorruptible. And, Trump, whom Comey says used the art of the deal techniques on him. Do you remember that? He says, he's still doing his art of the deal thing. I think he might have said that in the memos, but Trump likes to think that everybody's corruptible, that everyone has a price or can be blackmailed or can be pushed around and has an agenda. And Comey likes to think he doesn't have an agenda and that, he can't be corrupted. And so there's just this wonderful battle between them, just as a kind of literary story. I couldn't get enough of this.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, Trump is corrupt and says everyone's corrupt. And Comey has an enormous stake in his integrity and, clearly goes through a kind of anguish when it's challenged. But it does set him up in a certain way. I mean, this is the guy who had Reinhold Niebuhr as his secret Twitter handle, who was always quoting Thomas More at you. And, as much as I liked his book and found it really sincere, there is a certain lack of irony or just earthy humanity about someone who has that quality of righteousness.
He says, I think he says one thing he admires about leaders, because I will say this book is not just an effort to extenuate his actions in the 2016 election as much as we want to play it that way and pick sides. It really is a meditation on leadership. And some of these books that are coming out so fast, mostly they're quotes, and then there's prose stuff around them for the quotes to hang on. But this really, I think the way he walks us through his early mob prosecutions in the late 80s, early 90s, through the prosecution of the Black Mayor of Richmond, which I think was very interesting, where he had to kind of tried to turn a young Black minister on him. The Martha Stewart prosecution, which led him to believe that, no celebrity, in some cases, no woman was above being jailed for lying.
Let me just interrupt you there. It's interesting, Virginia. So he recounts these early cases when he was a prosecutor, first in the Southern District of New York, where he had the job Giuliani had before him, and then in Richmond, Virginia, I think it was. And the thread in all of them is I and we in the prosecutor's office wanted to be merciful. But in the end, we couldn't, because these people wouldn't admit their wrongdoing and tell the truth.
Yeah,
and
you're right.
one thing you can never forgive is lying to the FBI or lying to the Justice Department. If only these people had thrown themselves on the mercy of the court, i.e. us, we could have let them go with a slap on the wrist. Instead, they had to go to jail.
It also is, when he's talking about financial crimes and Martha Stewart, who fits this paradigm exactly, he kind of inadvertently gives some clues to would-be white-collar criminals, because white-collar criminals like the presidents of the banks in 2008, he says, can almost always get away with what they did, because so much of it is about their state of mind when they did something, and often they can just plead, I didn't know, I didn't understand this leveraging and this derivative, and someone else must have messed this up. But so he says, if you just say X, they would be fine, but they lie, and then we have them. It was interesting to me that so many crimes, he contrasted these white-collar crimes, and I get the sense there's a little bit of thinking toward whatever prosecution of Trump might take place, how hard these prosecutions are without a smoking gun and without he says, a bag of heroin in the room, where everybody knows what they're doing is wrong. It might very well be that with a Mike Flynn, for example, he might not have thought that making those calls was wrong or working, or he might at least claim those things. And as long as he doesn't lie going forward, he might get away with it. Or at least that's a suggestion, I think, in some of the parables in Higher Loyalty.
I admire James Comey, and I think, our country really depends in a way it hasn't before on there being people with a Comey-like sense of integrity, particularly in the judicial branch and in the justice function of government.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I would want to be friends with Comey. He's too much of a stiff.
Well, isn't it also interesting? I mean, he uses this phrase "comfortable in his own skin," and it says that that's important in a leader, that they be comfortable. And he's at pains to show us he's comfortable in his own skin when he explains that he keeps saying, "I like to promote a sense of fun around the office." For example, I once made a pun, and I mean, he says it more than once. That he's very jolly and that he's he keeps telling us how likable he is. At the same time, damn it, that whole account of how brutally bullied he was growing up was it when they moved from Yonkers to Palisades or something? And he tells us, lest we don't know, what a wedgie is, and gets us to feel it in our own butts. I mean, that's writing.
It was very vivid, but then you want
to bully him. I was just like, I would find you annoying too. I might have cheered on the wedgie. But
the compelling thing is, he does that. You've heard that move before. I was bullied, so I take the side of the under. But he says, the really important episode was this time when I was a bully, when I kind of joined with the mob and bullied this kid who was a little weird in college. Right.
Yeah.
And he says
he talked endlessly about his hometown girlfriend.
Right. I mean, you got the picture, but that's like, but in a way, I found that to be the really compelling thing. This is a guy whose consciousness is, I can't join the mob. Yeah. I'm not going to go along because they want me to go along. And that was why he ended up being such a hero in the Bush administration, in the famous hospital bed scene, which even if you know that story, he recounts really well in kind of riveting detail in this book.
Wait, can you retell the story? Because talk about an excerpt that has not been pulled out of this book and is fascinating and historically interesting.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was the little passage in the book, the 30 pages or whatever it is, that I enjoyed the most. So basically what happened was they had this warrantless wiretapping program, and Jack Goldsmith, who was head of the Office of Legal Counsel, said it wasn't legal. The authorization of it was dubious, and they were going beyond.
Post 9/11 heavy surveillance
after September 11th, and it followed what had happened with this torture memo, where Goldsmith had withdrawn this torture memo, which the CIA had used for justification. Anyway, there was a huge showdown with people from the White House, particularly from Dick Cheney's office, facing off against the Justice Department officials led by Comey. And what happened was John Ashcroft, who was the Attorney General, was rushed to the hospital with this dire pancreatitis. And the White House people, backed up by the Secret Service, were rushing to one side of the bed, and the Comey people, the Justice Department people, backed by the FBI, were rushing to the other side of the bed, and they were almost to the point of having a physical altercation. Cheney people and the Bush people wanted to get the semi-conscious Ashcroft to put his signature on this dubious renewal of this program, which eventually was thrown out and limited in scope. Anyway, but what's sort of interesting about that story to me is that Comey it becomes very intense for him that he's just not going to go along just because because everyone thinks one thing and because they're kind of bullying him and pressuring him to do it. And they're telling him, thousands of people could die if you don't renew this permission we have to do this kind of wiretapping.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think, he quotes himself as having said to Cheney, "That makes me feel bad, but I stand behind this."
The law is the law. He's a lawman. He's not going to break the law because someone tells him he has to. And that's his identity.
Thinking of that hospital bed, that incredibly vivid scene that he painted